Hey guys, Ford here, and in today's video we're going to talk about mental illness in prisons and go over a story about a prison guard who let a mentally ill inmate hang themselves. And when another officer asked if they could cut him down, she said no, he's just playing. The gameplay in the background for today's video is from World War II. Before I go over today's story, I wanted to talk about a couple statistics about mental illness in prisons. 20% of jail inmates have a history of mental illness, and there are currently 10 times more people with mental health issues in jail and state prisons than in state hospitals. Basically, what that means is now prisons are the primary place for care for mentally ill people rather than hospitals. On average, people with a history of mental illness stay longer in prison than those who don't. A big part of that is that people with a mental illness are actually just stuck in prison waiting for a bed to open up at a state hospital. What all of this means is that prison guards have to keep a special eye on inmates with mental illnesses. So when prison guards don't take their job seriously or aren't looking out for others, it can cause serious problems. Which brings us to today's story, which is about a prison guard who wasn't taking an inmate's suicide threat seriously. An inmate named Ryan Wilson, who had a serious history of mental illness, got in an argument with another inmate at the jail and then told the corrections officer that he would hang himself if he wasn't allowed outside of his cell. The officer, who was named Rebecca Hillman, didn't take any of his threats seriously. So the inmate, who wasn't joking, made a noose out of his bedsheet, attached it to a light fixture, and then hung himself. Another corrections officer came by and asked if he could cut him down, and the corrections officer told him no. She told the other officer that the inmate was just playing. The inmate was hanging for 15 minutes before he was cut down. The other corrections officer was a rookie, so he was just listening to her. He isn't being criminally charged with anything, but the other officer is. Both officers have been suspended for the time being, but Rebecca Hillman is going to go on trial for both falsifying documents and criminally negligent homicide. However, if she is found guilty, she will only face a maximum of 4 years in jail. How on earth can she only get 4 years for this? It's not like this was someone she wasn't supposed to be keeping an eye on. It's not like she was just walking down the street not in a jail, and someone said, "I'm going to hang myself unless this happens." No, this was someone who was under her care, under her supervision. This was someone that she knew had a history of mental illness. It is also not uncommon, unfortunately, for inmates in jail with mental illnesses to hurt themselves. And she was a captain. She should know that by now. Now, I don't know how the procedure works and what the standard way to go about things would be, but what I do know is that the standard way is not sit around and continue doing paperwork. This might be a little bit of a more controversial take, but bear with me. This seems far worse than nearly all of the police shootings that we are told are unjustified. We are usually told that police shootings are unjustified way too early when there isn't any evidence out, and the most obvious example of that is the Micaiah Bryant shooting, which I feel uncomfortable calling it a shooting, since it was justified, since Micaiah Bryant was in the act of trying to stab someone. There is absolutely no justification for the way that Ryan Wilson went. Yet we aren't going to hear anything about it. There won't be protests. This won't turn into a national news story, and in most people's eyes, he's going to just go down as another mentally ill person committing suicide in prison. That is, if they even hear about it. We are constantly talking about police reform, but what about prison reform? If we do prison reform, then there will be less problems for the police to deal with. The prison system failed Ryan Wilson. This wasn't his first time in jail. He had previously spent 7 years in jail for robbery prior to this sentence. After he was released from prison the first time, there was no real help for him. He couldn't find a job, and the only person who was there for him was his sister, who gave him money and was there to talk but couldn't be around that often. He ended up having to live at a homeless shelter and then fell back into bad habits by stealing money to try to pay for food, which is what landed him back in jail. It's really sad that Ryan Wilson wasn't given the help that he needed during the 7 years that he originally spent in prison. If he had been given that help that he needed, then he wouldn't be out committing crimes again. He wouldn't be in a position where he needed to steal money for food. Unfortunately, a combination of receiving little to no help while in prison and a negative stigma around ex-inmates, especially those who have been formerly diagnosed with mental illnesses, ends up resulting in a world where someone who has been to prison with a mental illness comes out with no help and is not going to be able to find a job, or at least it's going to be very difficult to find one. It's very rare for people in those situations to get help on their own. It's gonna take a lot to solve this problem, and it's not gonna happen overnight. But it is important that we start talking about it and start to get to work on solving it. We constantly talk about police reform, but prison reform is just as, if not more important. Inmates getting the help that they need while they're in prison so that they don't go out and commit crimes again will not only make policing easier, but over time will also make prisons less populated because they won't keep cycling through people over and over again. That is going to be it for today's video. I hope that you guys did enjoy. If you did, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for new videos every day. There will be links to the sources that I used when making today's video in the description below, as well as a link to my Twitch channel where I record all of this gameplay live. Again, the gameplay in the background for today's video was from World War II. Have a great rest of your day.